A prince waited almost a quarter of a century for one of the grandest titles in the royal family. Then, when he finally got it, everyone realized the title would die with him. That is the part people keep coming back to. Prince Edward spent years living with a promise hanging over his head. Not a loud promise, not one shouted from palace balconies. A quiet one. The kind of royal promise that sits in the background for decades and only makes sense much later. When the timing changes, the players get older, and the monarchy starts reshaping itself from the inside. On 10 March 2023, his 59th birthday, King Charles III gave Edward the title Duke of Edinburgh. On paper, it looked like the end of a very long wait. It looked neat, emotional even. His father had held that title. The family had talked for years about Edward one day receiving it, and now, at last, he did. But there was a catch. This dukedom was not set up to pass to Edward's son. That one detail changed the whole mood of the story. Because royal titles are supposed to tell you where power is going next. They usually move in a straight line. Father to son, one generation to the next. That is the old rhythm. That is the pattern people expect. So when a royal title suddenly stops instead of continuing, people notice. And when it stops inside a family that is already trying to slim itself down, people ask why. Today we are diving into what really happened with Edward, his son James, and the title that turned out to be both a reward and a limit at the same time. At first glance, it looks simple. Edward became the Duke of Edinburgh. His wife Sophie became Duchess of Edinburgh. Their son James continued using Earl of Wessex, a title tied to his father's older title. End of story. Except it was not the end of the story at all. Because now there are two title systems sitting on top of each other inside the same branch of the family. One title is temporary. One keeps going. One ends with Edward. One moves to James. And hanging over all of that is another strange detail. James has long been legally entitled to be styled as a prince, yet he has never used it. So now you have a son who may inherit one title, lose another before he can ever touch it, and still quietly hold a royal entitlement he seems to want nothing to do with. That is not normal royal housekeeping. And this is why people close to royal coverage keep circling back to the same question. Was Edward's long-awaited promotion really about honoring him, or was it also about controlling the future? Because when you look closely, this was not just a birthday gift from a king to his younger brother. It was a piece of planning. A title handed over in a form that looked generous, but came with an end date built into it. Many people missed that in the first wave of headlines. They saw the smiling photographs. They saw the tribute to Prince Philip. They saw a promise fulfilled. What they did not see, at least not right away, was the architecture underneath. The monarchy was not simply giving Edward something. It was also deciding what his son would never receive. And that is where this story gets interesting. The strange thing is that Edward is not a royal who has spent years fighting for attention. Quite the opposite. He and Sophie became known for taking on steady duties, showing up, working, and not making drama out of themselves. They were not the noisy branch. They were not the branch forcing headlines. In a family where public friction has become almost normal, Edward and Sophie built their image through patience, which makes this even more fascinating. Because the patient royals are often the ones people underestimate. They do not complain in public. They do not brief loudly. They do not turn every moment into a negotiation. But that does not mean nothing is happening around them. In fact, sometimes the quietest royal stories are the most revealing, because they show how the institution really works when cameras are not catching every move. And in Edward's case, the institution did something very unusual. It kept a promise from 1999. But it kept it in a way that protected the future from becoming too crowded. That is not an accident. Whispers around royal reporting have long suggested that King Charles wanted a smaller monarchy, a tighter one, more controlled, less weighed down by generations of inherited rank. If that is true, then Edward's title tells you a lot. It says loyalty can still be rewarded. It says tradition can still be honored. But it also says those rewards may no longer be built to last forever. One title for life. One title for the next generation. One prince who is not called prince. And one family arrangement that the more you stare at it, the stranger it becomes. Because James, Edward's son, stands in a very odd place. He uses the title Earl of Wessex by courtesy, which means he uses it because of his father's rank, not because he yet owns it in his own right. One day, when Edward dies, James is expected to inherit that title properly. But the larger title, Duke of Edinburgh, the one with all the history and weight, stops before it ever reaches him. That is the twist. A son standing one step away from a grand royal title, while knowing that title was never meant to become his. And once people understood that, the story widened. It was no longer just about Edward finally getting what had once been promised. It became about what the monarchy is trying to become now. Less automatic, less inherited, more selective. But to understand how we got here, you have to go back to the beginning. Back to a wedding in 1999. Back to the title nobody expected him to take. And back to one of the oddest royal origin stories in modern memory. When Prince Edward married Sophie Rhys-Jones in 1999, most people thought they already knew what would happen next. He would become a duke. That was the pattern. That was the rule people had in their heads. Senior royal sons married, and they were given dukedoms. Prince Charles had his great titles. Prince Andrew became Duke of York. Edward, as the next royal son to marry, seemed headed in the same direction. Then the palace did something unexpected. Edward was not made a duke. He was made the Earl of Wessex. That may not sound dramatic to people outside royal watching, but inside that world, it stood out straight away. A dukedom has a different weight. It signals rank, permanence, and place inside the family order. An earldom is still grand, of course, but it felt like a break from the expected path. And because the royal family rarely breaks old patterns without a reason, people immediately started asking why. Then came the detail that made the whole thing even stranger. According to reports that followed the wedding, Edward liked the title Wessex after seeing Shakespeare in Love, where a character called Lord Wessex appeared on screen. That detail has never stopped sounding unusual. A royal title chosen partly because of a film role? It is exactly the kind of thing that sounds too odd to invent, which is why it has lived on in commentary ever since. And yet there was another layer. At the same time Edward became Earl of Wessex, Buckingham Palace said there was a long-term plan in place. One day, he would receive the title Duke of Edinburgh. That title was then held by his father, Prince Philip. It could not be handed over yet. Philip was alive. The Queen was still on the throne. The timing had to wait. So Edward stepped into married life with one title in hand and another title floating out in the distance like a promise nobody could put a date on. That wait lasted 24 years. It is worth pausing on that. 24 years is a long time to live inside a royal arrangement everyone says will happen one day. During those years, Edward and Sophie slowly built a reputation that was very different from the flashier parts of royal life. They were not the ones dominating headlines every week. They were not the couple people rushed to comment on every morning. But they were there. Again and again. Engagements, charities, public duty, routine appearances, quiet reliability. That sort of thing can look boring from the outside. Inside a monarchy, it matters a great deal. Royal insiders and journalists often pay attention to the people who do not create extra trouble, because institutions under pressure lean hardest on the people who keep showing up. Edward and Sophie became those people. They were not glamorous in the loud way. They were useful, steady, safe. And all the while, the old promise remained in the background. Then the royal world changed fast. Prince Philip died in April 2021. When that happened, the Duke of Edinburgh title passed to Charles as the eldest son. Then Queen Elizabeth II died in September 2022, and Charles became king. At that point, the title merged with the crown. It stopped existing as a separate title in the ordinary way. Now the decision was his. He could recreate it, or he could choose not to, and for a while, it looked like he might not. That was the moment people began to realize the old promise was not as secure as they had once believed. Reports began circulating that Charles did not intend to give the Edinburgh title to Edward after all. Commentators noticed the silence. Clarence House did not rush to knock the story down, and that silence mattered. Because Edward had already waited decades. By then, he was not some young prince just starting out. He had spent years carrying out duties, years being linked with his father's legacy, especially through the Duke of Edinburgh's award. To many people, if anyone looked like the natural person to carry that title forward, it was him. So when the reports suggested he might be passed over, the reaction was sharper than people expected. It was not just about sentiment, it was about continuity. Many felt Edward had earned it through work and patience. Others saw a bigger shift. Maybe Charles was not just deciding Edward's future. Maybe he was changing the whole logic of how titles would work from now on. And that is when the warning signs began to show. Because once a monarchy starts treating old promises as flexible, every title becomes a clue. People began reading meaning into timing, wording, and structure. Why the delay? Why the silence? Why not settle the issue quickly? Why let speculation build? On the surface, it was only one title. Underneath, it felt like a test case for a new royal model. Then came another reported concern: Scotland. The Duke of Edinburgh title carries symbolic weight there, and according to coverage at the time, there were worries inside palace circles about how the title might land in a changing political climate. That meant the decision was no longer just family business. It touched the mood of the country too. So the title hung in the air, not forgotten, not confirmed, just waiting. And then, on Edward's birthday in 2023, the answer arrived. But the answer did not end the questions, it created new ones. Because Charles kept the promise, yes, he just kept it in a way that changed everything. On that particular occasion, the palace announcement looked warm, clean, even generous. Prince Edward was now the Duke of Edinburgh. His wife Sophie was now the Duchess of Edinburgh. The title linked back to Prince Philip, to family continuity, to a promise first spoken of in 1999. It had emotional value. It had history. It had the kind of royal symbolism people understand immediately, even if they do not follow every technical rule. But under the surface, the grant was doing something very different. It was being given only for Edward's lifetime. That was the real trigger. Because once people noticed that, the mood changed. This was no ordinary handover. This was not a father's title simply moving down the family line through the next branch. This was a controlled creation. A title restored to honor Edward, yes, but restored in a way that blocked inheritance. So let's talk about what really happened there. Edward already held the Earl of Wessex title, which had been with him since 1999. That title follows the older rule. It passes down. One day, it is expected to go to James. The same applies to the Earl of Forfar title granted in 2019. Those titles sit inside the normal family pattern, but the Edinburgh title does not. So now Edward holds two very different things at once. One title belongs to the old royal system of passing power through bloodline. The other belongs only to him, and only until his death. That split is where the crisis lives. Because James, Edward's son, is already using Earl of Wessex as a courtesy title. He uses it because he is the eldest son of a duke. In public life, that is how he is styled, but legally, he does not yet own it. His father does. One day he is expected to inherit it properly. So father and son are linked to the same title at the same time, but in different ways. And then there is the bigger shadow over James's place in all this. Under the old 1917 letters patent, male line grandchildren of a British monarch are entitled to the style His or Her Royal Highness and the title of Prince or Princess. That means James, as the son of Edward, has long had that entitlement sitting there in the background. It was never switched off. It was simply never used. That part makes people lean in. Because James is not publicly known as Prince James. He has grown up in a more reduced setting, styled in line with his parents' choice to raise their children with less emphasis on royal rank. Sophie even said publicly that the children had those titles available and could choose whether to use them when older, though she thought that was unlikely. James turned 18 in December 2025. He did not take the prince title. He did not start using her. He did not suddenly step into a more formal royal identity, and that silence told its own story. A young man legally close to royal status, yet seeming to want none of the performance that comes with it. That might sound tidy. Personal choice. End of matter. But royal structures do not like loose ends. If an entitlement exists, it exists. Even if unused, even if ignored, even if everyone involved would rather keep life simple. So now the family sits inside a strange overlap. James is, first, the courtesy Earl of Wessex. He is, second, the future inheritor of the actual Earldom of Wessex and Earl of Forfar. And he is, third, a person who could use prince and hert status under old constitutional rules, even though he has not done so. That is not ordinary. And when these systems overlap, royal paperwork becomes more than paperwork. It becomes a map of what the monarchy wants to say about itself. What counts, what gets used, what remains dormant, what gets passed on, what gets stopped. Many people watching from the outside saw only a simple family tribute in 2023, but people who follow palace structure more closely saw something else. They saw a monarchy trying to honor service while also drawing a line under automatic inheritance. That line became clearer when people looked back at the months before Edward got the title. There had been reports in 2021 that Charles might not recreate the Duke of Edinburgh title for Edward at all. That idea caused real discomfort. Edward had become one of the stable figures in the working royal group. He had taken on more as the family narrowed. Sophie had too. Their branch was not glamorous, but it was dependable. And that mattered even more after the royal family lost working members. Harry and Meghan stepped back. Andrew fell away from public duties. The institution grew smaller, and the load on those still standing grew heavier. Edward and Sophie did not make a drama of it. They just kept working. More engagements, more representation, more pressure absorbed quietly. That background is what made the 2023 title grant feel both earned and strangely limited. It was as if the monarchy was saying, yes, we see your service. Yes, the promise stands. Yes, this history matters. But also, No, this line does not continue forever. That is a hard kind of reward. And it opens a bigger question. If the title was not built to stay with James, then who was it being saved for? That was when the story stopped being about Edward alone. That was when the full truth began to come into view. What many people do not know is that the most revealing part of this story may not be the promise kept in 2023. It may be the future that promise was built to protect. Because once Charles granted the Duke of Edinburgh title only for Edward's lifetime, a new possibility opened up. The title would return to the crown after Edward's death. It would not be locked into James's line. It would wait. And in royal circles, one name has often hovered around that future possibility: Princess Charlotte. Now, this is the part that gives the whole story its bigger shape. If Edward had received the title in a normal hereditary way, the line would have been simple. Edward would hold it. James would inherit it. Then James's descendants after him. End of discussion. But that is not what Charles did. He created a structure with an ending already built in. That means a future monarch could recreate the title for someone else. And many have long suspected that someone else could one day be Charlotte. Why does that matter so much? Because titles in the royal family are never just labels. They are signals. They show where affection sits, where trust sits, and where the institution believes its own future lies. Charlotte is not a distant cousin wandering around the edge of royal life. She is near the center. She is part of the direct line. Her public role, if current patterns hold, is only going to grow. So if one day she were given the title Duchess of Edinburgh, the symbolism would be enormous. The title, first created for Prince Philip in 1947, would have gone from Philip to Charles, from Charles to Edward for life, and then perhaps, in a future reign, into the female line through Charlotte. That would not be random. That would be a statement. It would say the monarchy is no longer handing out major titles only by old habit, but placing them where the future of the institution seems strongest. And suddenly, Edward's strange arrangement makes sense in a new way. It was not just about him. It was about him and beyond him. That does not make his story less personal. In some ways, it makes it more moving. Edward waited decades. He accepted delay. He accepted uncertainty. Then, when the title finally came, he accepted the limit attached to it too. No public complaint. No visible friction. No effort to turn a restricted gift into a public grievance. That response fits the pattern people have long seen in him. Continuity over noise. Duty over status. Acceptance over negotiation. Sophie fits that pattern too. In the years when the monarchy came under pressure from several sides at once, she was often described as steady, calm, and quietly effective. She did not make a spectacle out of increased responsibilities. She simply took them on. That sort of behavior rarely makes the loudest headlines, but institutions notice it. And their children seem, in their own way, to have absorbed the same approach. Lady Louise has lived largely outside the main royal glare, focused on study and ordinary work. James, even with were technically available to him, has shown no visible hunger for royal display. That restraint is striking. In a family where titles can become flashpoints, where status can become a contest, this branch has often looked almost uninterested in forcing the issue. That may be why their story feels so revealing. It shows a version of royal life that is less about grabbing space and more about fitting into a structure that is changing around you. Of course, the structure is still complicated. James is expected one day to inherit Wessex and Forfar. He is not expected to inherit Edinburgh. He could use prince and status, but seems unlikely to. So his future looks oddly balanced, close to the royal family by blood, touched by titles, but not fully defined by either. That may be exactly what Edward and Sophie wanted when they raised their children with a lighter approach to royal styling. And it may be exactly what James wants too. So where does that leave the bigger picture? It leaves us with a monarchy trying to do two things at once. It wants to honor the past, but it also wants to prune the family tree. It wants to reward loyalty, but not endlessly multiply inherited rank. It wants old promises kept, but kept in forms that suit a smaller future. That is why this story matters. On the surface, it is about one prince finally receiving the title once linked to his father. Underneath, it is about how institutions change without always admitting that change out loud. Royal families rarely say, "We are rewriting the rules in front of you." They do it softly, in timing, in wording, in whether a title lasts one lifetime or many, in which child receives something, and which child does not, in what remains legally possible, even when it is never used. That is the real gossip here. Not vulgar gossip, not cheap scandal. The deeper kind, the kind that reveals how power behaves when it wants to look traditional while quietly becoming something else. And Prince Edward's title story is full of that. A wedding in 1999 that did not follow the expected pattern. A promise that waited 24 years. A birthday announcement that looked like a family tribute. A son standing under one title, beside another, and beyond a third. A monarchy slimming itself down without saying the quiet part too loudly, and somewhere in the distance perhaps, a future princess waiting at the far end of that design. That is why this story stays with people. Because it is not really about one dukedom, it is about what survives, what stops, and who gets written into the future when old systems no longer run by themselves. These stories provide insight into something bigger than titles. They show how families protect image, how institutions manage change, and how silence can sometimes tell you more than ceremony ever will.